Hazel Montgomery, 28, sat frozen in her apartment, phone still pressed to her ear as her parents' voices continued through the speaker. "Living with Hazel's failures has been our greatest disappointment," her father said to her younger sister, unaware Hazel could hear every word. "We've always known Madison was the one who'd make something of herself." Tears streamed down Hazel's face as 28 years of unconditional love shattered in an instant, revealing a truth that would forever alter her relationship with her family and set her on a path of self-discovery that no one could have predicted. Hey everyone, before I dive deeper into what happened next, I'd love to know where you're watching from. Drop your location in the comments below. If this family betrayal story resonates with you, hit that like button and subscribe to join our storytelling community. I never thought I'd be sharing something this personal, but sometimes the most painful experiences teach us the most valuable lessons about family loyalty and finding your own worth. Now let's continue with how this accidental phone call changed everything. Growing up in suburban Boston, I had always felt the subtle inequalities between how my parents treated my younger sister Madison and me. Madison was the miracle baby who came along when my mother was told she couldn't have more children. 5 years my junior, she excelled at everything, straight A's through school, captain of the volleyball team, and prom queen with the perfect boyfriend. Meanwhile, I was the cautious creative one who preferred books to sports and struggled with math despite my best efforts. Our family photo albums told the story clearly. Madison's achievements documented meticulously with professional photography, while my milestones were captured in hurried snapshots if remembered at all. Still, I convinced myself this was normal, that all siblings experienced some degree of favoritism. I told myself that love wasn't a competition, and my parents were just naturally more excited about Madison's achievements because they aligned better with their own values. When I decided to pursue an English literature degree instead of pre-med, like my father had hoped, the disappointment was palpable but never directly addressed. "It's your life," my mother had said, with a tight smile that didn't reach her eyes. Dad simply nodded and changed the subject to Madison's perfect SAT scores. I brushed it off, determined to make them proud in my own way. After college, while Madison went to Yale Medical School as expected, I moved to New York to pursue writing. My first few years were tough. Working as a barista by day and submitting manuscripts by night, all rejected with form letters. My apartment was tiny, my bank account perpetually near zero. During our weekly Sunday calls, my parents would listen to my updates with polite interest before eagerly turning to Madison's latest accomplishments. "Your sister just got selected for a prestigious research position," they'd gush. "Dr. Peterson says she's the most promising student he's had in decades." I'd swallow my envy and offer genuine congratulations. After all, Madison had always been kind to me, never flaunting her success or treating me with anything but sisterly affection. It wasn't her fault our parents measured worth through achievements and status. Last Christmas, when I couldn't afford to fly home, I shipped modest gifts instead. Handmade bookmarks for Mom, a vintage fountain pen for Dad I'd found at a flea market, and a journal with a hand-painted cover for Madison. In return, they sent me a generic gift card with a group photo where Madison stood, centered between our parents, all in matching sweaters I hadn't been sent. The card read, "Wishing you were here, Hope. New York treats you well in the new year." Despite everything, I never doubted they loved me. I believed they were proud of me in their own way, even if they couldn't understand my choices. I imagined they defended me to their friends. "Hazel's following her dream," they might say. "It's not the path we would have chosen, but she's always been so determined." I maintained this comforting illusion until that fateful Tuesday evening when they forgot to hang up the phone. I had called to share some good news. After years of rejection, a literary magazine had finally accepted one of my short stories for publication. They had listened, offered lukewarm congratulations, and then said they needed to go because Madison was coming over for dinner. I said my goodbyes, heard what I thought was the call ending, and was about to put my phone down when their voices continued. "Did Hazel sound okay to you?" my mother asked someone. "Presumably my father." "Same as always," Dad replied dismissively, going on about some story getting published in some magazine nobody reads. "Well, at least she's trying," Mom said with a sigh that carried through the phone like a physical blow. "Though I wish she'd be more realistic about her prospects." 28, and still making coffee for a living. The silence that followed felt like an eternity before I heard the doorbell ring in the background. "That must be Madison," Mom said, her voice instantly brightening. I should have hung up, then preserved what little dignity remained of my relationship with my parents. But something kept me listening, some masochistic need to finally hear the unfiltered truth. The door opened and I heard Madison's voice greeting our parents. Then came the question that would change everything. "How's Hazel doing?" Madison asked. "Did she call today?" And that's when my father spoke those devastating words. "Living with Hazel's failures has been our greatest disappointment. We've always known Madison was the one who'd make something of herself." The phone slipped from my hand and clattered to the floor, but I could still hear my mother's voice continuing the conversation. "I know we shouldn't compare them, but honestly, Madison, sometimes I wonder where we went wrong with your sister. We gave you both the same opportunities, the same love and guidance." I scrambled to pick up the phone, my hands trembling so violently I almost couldn't press the end call button. When I finally did, the sudden silence in my apartment was deafening. I sat on my second-hand couch, stunned and hollow, as if someone had scooped out my insides and left nothing but an empty shell. "The same love," I whispered to myself, the words tasting like ash in my mouth. The careful construct I'd built around my family dynamic, the excuses, the rationalizations, the benefit of the doubt I'd given them for years, crumbled like a sandcastle in the tide. That night I didn't cry. Instead, I moved through my apartment like a ghost making tea. I didn't drink, opening books I couldn't read, staring at my computer screen, where the acceptance email from the literary magazine still sat open. The achievement that had made me so proud just hours ago now seemed pathetic, just as my parents saw it, a token publication in some magazine nobody reads. The next morning I called in sick to the coffee shop where I worked. My manager, Jenny, didn't question it. I'd never missed a day in the 2 years I'd been there. I spent the day in bed, replaying the phone call in my mind, dissecting every word, every inflection, searching for some interpretation that hurt less than the obvious one. There was none. By evening my phone had accumulated 6 missed calls. 3 from Mom, 2 from Dad, 1 from Madison. Voicemails asking why I wasn't answering, if I was okay, saying they were worried. The irony was bitter. Now they noticed. Now they cared. I finally texted my sister, "I'm fine, just need some space." I couldn't bring myself to contact my parents directly. Madison called immediately. I let it go to voicemail. She texted, "What's going on? Mom and Dad are freaking out. This isn't like you." That made me laugh. A sharp, humorless sound that echoed in my empty apartment. What did they know about what was like me? Had they ever really seen me at all? After 3 days of isolation, I emerged from my apartment for necessities. At the corner store, I ran into my neighbor Eliza, a freelance photographer I'd exchanged pleasantries with but never really known. She took one look at me and insisted I join her for coffee. "You look like you've had the week from hell," she said, as we sat in the neighborhood cafe, not the one where I worked. Something about her direct approach, her lack of pretense, broke through my defenses. Before I knew it, I was telling her everything. The phone call, the years of subtle favoritism, the careful narrative I'd constructed to protect myself from the truth. "That's messed up," Eliza said when I finished. No platitudes, no attempts to find silver linings or excuses for my parents. Just simple acknowledgement of the pain. "What are you going to do now?" I stared into my cooling coffee. "I don't know. Pretend I never heard it. Confront them. Neither option seems right." "What do you want?" she asked. "Forget what you think you should do. What do you actually want? The question caught me off guard. What did I want? I'd spent so long trying to earn my parents' approval that I'd lost sight of my own desires. I want to stop feeling like a disappointment, I finally said. I want to prove them wrong. Not just about my writing, but about me as a person. I want them to regret ever saying those words. Eliza nodded. Then that's your answer. Not for them, for you. That night, I opened my laptop and wrote with a ferocity I'd never experienced. The words poured out of me raw and honest, a story about family expectations and the damage they can cause. When I finished at dawn, I had the first draft of what would become my breakout piece, a personal essay titled The Afterthought. I submitted it to the same literary magazine that had accepted my short story. 3 days later, the editor called me personally. "This is the most powerful thing we've published in years," she told me. "We want to feature it in our next issue. And there's something else. I've shared it with a friend at the New Yorker. She wants to talk to you about expanding it into a feature." For the first time in weeks, I felt something other than pain. A spark of vindication, yes, but also something more. The realization that my voice mattered, that my experience resonated. The words my father had dismissed as worthless had touched someone else deeply. Maybe they could touch many someones. Meanwhile, my parents continued calling daily. Madison texted regularly, increasingly concerned by my uncharacteristic silence. "They think you're mad at them," she wrote. "Are you?" I finally responded with the truth. "I heard what Dad said after they thought they hung up, about me being their greatest disappointment." Her reply came hours later. "Oh God, Hazel. I'm so sorry. I had no idea they felt that way. What can I do?" "Nothing," I texted back. "This is between me and them." But in reality, it was between me and myself now. The parents I thought I had, flawed but loving, proud in their own way, had never existed. It was time to stop living for their approval and start living for myself. 2 months passed. The Afterthought was published in the literary magazine to unexpected acclaim. The editor had been right. The raw honesty of the piece struck a chord with readers. It was shared widely online, generating discussion about family dynamics, favoritism, and the pressure to conform to parental expectations. The New Yorker feature followed an expanded version that delved deeper into my relationship with my parents and sister. I didn't use our real names, but the essence was there. The golden child and the afterthought, the constant striving for approval that was never forthcoming. I wrote about the phone call that shattered my illusions, but also about the strange freedom that came after once I stopped measuring my worth through their eyes. The day the New Yorker piece went live online, my inbox exploded. Readers from across the country wrote to share similar experiences, to thank me for putting words to feelings they'd never been able to express. Literary agents reached out asking if I had more work, if I'd considered writing a book. Amid the flood of messages was one from Madison. "I read your article," she wrote. "It's beautiful and heartbreaking. I'm sorry I never saw what was happening. Maybe I didn't want to see it. Can we meet?" I agreed to a video call. When Madison's face appeared on my screen, I was struck by how tired she looked. The perfect golden child showing cracks in her veneer. "Mom and Dad don't know about the article yet," she said. "They don't follow literary publications. But they will find out eventually." "I know," I replied. "I'm not hiding it." She hesitated. "They've been a mess since you stopped calling. Dad especially. He knows something's wrong but can't figure out what." I felt a flicker of satisfaction at this, immediately followed by shame for feeling it. Madison wasn't my enemy. She hadn't asked to be the favorite. "Have they ever talked about me like that before?" I asked. "Be honest." Madison looked away from the camera. "Not in those exact words, but yes. They've always compared us. It wasn't fair to either of us, Hazel. They put me on a pedestal that was impossible to stay on, and they never gave you credit for your strengths. Her admission hurt, but it also validated what I'd always sensed beneath the surface. "Thank you for being honest." "What happens now?" she asked. "I don't know," I admitted. "But I can't go back to pretending." After our call, I made a decision. I would focus entirely on my writing, throw myself into the opportunities that were suddenly opening up. My coffee shop manager, Jenny, was surprisingly supportive when I gave notice. "I read your piece in the New Yorker," she told me, making me wonder how many people in my life had seen me laid bare on those pages. "You've got a real gift, Hazel. I always thought you were meant for more than making lattes." The irony wasn't lost on me. A boss who'd known me for 2 years had more faith in my abilities than the parents who'd raised me. With my final paycheck and the money from the New Yorker piece, I took a risk. I signed a 6-month lease on a tiny office space in a co-working building, a place dedicated solely to my writing. On my first day there, I met my office neighbor Leo Castillo, a graphic novelist whose work I'd admired from afar. "The afterthought girl," he said when I introduced myself. That piece wrecked me. My dad was the same way with my brother. We started having lunch together, sharing stories and creative frustrations. Leo became my first real friend in the writing world, someone who understood both the craft and the compulsion behind it. A month later, I signed with a literary agent who believed I had a memoir in me. "People need to hear this story," she said. "The full version." The advance wasn't huge, but it was enough to focus on writing full-time. For the first time in my adult life, I felt like I was on solid ground, building something real, instead of chasing a dream that always seemed just out of reach. And then my parents showed up at my apartment, unannounced. I hadn't spoken to them since the phone call 4 months earlier. Our only communication had been through Madison, who had become an uncomfortable intermediary. They looked older than I remembered, my father's shoulders slightly stooped, my mother's face lined with worry. "May we come in?" Dad asked, his usual confident tone replaced by something tentative. I stepped aside to let them enter, my heart hammering in my chest. They sat awkwardly on my second-hand couch, looking around at the apartment they'd visited only once before when I'd first moved to New York 5 years ago. "We read your article," Mom said finally. "Your sister showed it to us." I waited, arms crossed, unwilling to make this easier for them. "Is that really how you felt all these years?" Dad asked. "Like we were disappointed in you?" The genuine confusion in his voice almost broke me. "Almost." "You said I was your greatest disappointment," I reminded him. "I heard you say those exact words to Madison." He flinched. "I didn't mean—" "Yes, you did," I interrupted. "Maybe you didn't mean for me to hear it, but you meant what you said." My mother started to cry, silent tears tracking down her cheeks. "We've made terrible mistakes, Hazel. We never realized how our words were affecting you." "It wasn't just words," I said. "It was actions too. Every time you prioritized Madison's achievements over my existence. Every time you made it clear that her path was valuable and mine was just tolerated." My father looked genuinely stricken. "We thought we were motivating you, pushing you to reach your potential. By making me feel like I was never good enough, how was that supposed to help me?" They had no answer for that. We sat in uncomfortable silence until my mother spoke again. "Your article. It's beautiful. We had no idea you could write like that. That you had such depth." I laughed, the sound sharp and bitter. "That's the problem. You never bothered to find out." The confrontation with my parents left me emotionally drained but strangely empowered. For the first time, I had spoken my truth to them without filtering it through a desire for their approval. They had left with promises to do better to rebuild our relationship, but I remained skeptical. Words came easily in moments of crisis. It was the consistent actions afterward that would tell the true story. Meanwhile, my career was taking unexpected turns. The memoir deal was finalized, giving me a deadline and a purpose. My agent had also connected me with a popular podcast that wanted to interview me about family dynamics and recovering from parental disappointment. The host, Nora Chen, had built a following by discussing precisely these kinds of complex personal stories. Your piece resonated with so many people, Nora told me during our pre-interview call. Everyone has experienced some form of family disappointment, but few can articulate it as clearly as you did. The day of the podcast recording, I sat in my apartment, headphones on, heart racing. This would be my first time speaking publicly about my experience, rather than writing about it. The protective barrier of the page would be gone. It would just be my voice, my story transmitted to thousands of listeners. Today we're talking with Hazel Montgomery. Nora began after the intro music faded. Hazel recently wrote a powerful essay about overhearing her parents call her their greatest disappointment, and how that moment forced her to confront years of family dynamics. Hazel, thank you for joining us and being willing to share your story. As I spoke about my experience, something unexpected happened. Instead of feeling exposed or vulnerable, I felt a growing sense of ownership over my narrative. Each question Nora asked allowed me to reclaim another piece of my story, to reshape it, from a tale of rejection into one of self-discovery. What would you say to other people who feel like they're living in someone's shadow? Nora asked, toward the end of our conversation. I considered this carefully. I'd say that seeking validation from people who can't or won't give it is a recipe for lifelong disappointment. The hardest but most important thing I've learned is that you have to define success on your own terms, and sometimes the people who should support you the most are the least equipped to do so. After the recording ended, Nora stayed on the line. That was incredible, Hazel. Would you consider coming back for our live event next month? It's a panel discussion about family estrangement and reconciliation. I agreed without hesitation, surprising myself with my readiness to step further into the public eye. When I hung up, I felt a strange mixture of exhaustion and exhilaration. I opened my laptop to make notes while the conversation was fresh in my mind, and saw an email notification pop up. It was from my mother. "Dear Hazel," it began. "I've been thinking about our conversation and everything you said. You're right that words are not enough. I want to show you that we're serious about making amends. Your father and I have started seeing a family therapist to understand where we went wrong and how we can do better. If you're willing, we'd like you to join us for a session when you feel ready. No pressure, just an open invitation. Love, Mom." I stared at the screen, unsure how to feel. Part of me wanted to dismiss this as another empty gesture, but another part recognized the effort it must have taken for my proud, perfect parents to admit they needed professional help. Before I could formulate a response, my phone rang. It was Leo. "Have you checked Twitter?" he asked without preamble. "No, why? Your podcast episode just dropped. It's blowing up, Hazel. You're trending." I quickly opened Twitter to find hundreds of notifications. People were sharing quotes from the interview, tagging me in their own stories of family disappointment and recovery, creating a spontaneous community around the shared experience of never feeling enough in their parents' eyes. One tweet in particular caught my eye: listening to @Hazel Montgomery on @NoraChats and sobbing in my car. You have to define success on your own terms. Where was this advice when I was killing myself trying to be the daughter my parents wanted instead of the person I am? As I scrolled through the responses, a strange realization dawned on me. My most painful experience had become a lifeline for others. The words I'd written in the darkest moment of my life were now bringing light to people I'd never met. There was a power in that I hadn't anticipated. I closed Twitter and called Madison. "Have Mom and Dad really started therapy?" I asked when she answered. "Yes," she said, sounding surprised. "Dad was resistant at first, but he's actually engaging now. They've had 3 sessions. Why didn't you tell me? I didn't think you'd believe me," Madison admitted. "And I wanted them to tell you themselves when they were ready." I felt a flicker of something I hadn't expected: hope. Not that things would magically return to normal, but that perhaps something new and healthier could emerge from the ruins of our family myth. "The podcast I recorded went live today," I told her. People are responding. Intensely. I listened to it this morning, Madison said. You were amazing, Hazel. So articulate and honest. She paused. I've been thinking a lot about my role in all this. I benefited from their favoritism, even if I didn't create it. I'm sorry I never stood up for you more. Her apology touched me in a way our parents' attempts hadn't. Madison had always been kind to me, but this was the first time she'd acknowledged the systemic imbalance in our family structure. Thank you, I said, meaning it. That means a lot. After we hung up, I found myself at a crossroads. The path forward was unclear, but for once that uncertainty didn't terrify me. I had survived my worst fear, confronting the truth about my parents' perception of me, and had emerged stronger for it. Whatever came next, I would face it on my own terms. I opened my email and responded to my mother. I appreciate you both taking this step. I'm not ready for a joint session yet, but I'm open to the possibility in the future. I need more time. Then, I turned back to my work, to the memoir that was taking shape under my fingers. The story wasn't just about family disappointment anymore. It was about finding your voice when others have silenced it, about creating your own definition of success when the one you've been given doesn't fit. Hey everyone, I'm taking a quick breather here as we've reached a turning point in my story. I can feel your support through the screen, and it reminds me of how I felt seeing those first responses to my podcast. If my experience is resonating with you, I'd be grateful if you'd hit that like button and subscribe to stay with me for the conclusion. I remember feeling so alone in this moment, wondering if I was making the right choices. Have you ever stood at a similar crossroads in your relationships? The next part reveals how everything changed in ways I never could have predicted, so stick around to see how this family drama unfolds. A week after the podcast aired, I received a call from an unfamiliar number. Hesitantly, I answered. Is this Hazel Montgomery? A woman's voice asked. Yes, who's this? My name is Eleanor Wright. I'm a producer for the Morning Light Show on CBN. We'd like to have you as a guest to discuss your New Yorker piece and the response to your recent podcast appearance. I nearly dropped my phone. Morning Light was a nationally televised talk show with millions of viewers. This was exposure on a scale I couldn't have imagined. Are you still there? Eleanor asked after my prolonged silence. Yes, sorry, I'm just surprised. Why me? Your story has clearly struck a chord. We're doing a segment on family dynamics and healing from parental disappointment. Your perspective would be invaluable. I agreed to appear, then immediately panicked. Writing about my experience was one thing. Talking about it on national television was entirely different. I called Leo for moral support. You have to do it, he insisted, over dinner at our favorite local restaurant. Think about all the people you'll reach who need to hear this. What if my parents see it? I asked, voicing my real fear. Leo gave me a pointed look. Isn't that part of the point? They should see it. They should understand the impact of their actions, not just on you, but on others who might recognize themselves in your story. He was right, but the thought still terrified me. Not just because of my parents, but because appearing on television would mean truly stepping into a public role. No longer just a writer sharing her experience, but potentially an advocate for others with similar stories. The night before the Morning Light appearance, I received another email from my mother. This one included an attachment, a scan of a handwritten letter from my father. Dear Hazel, it began in his precise handwriting. Words have never come as easily to me as they seem to come to you. Perhaps that's why I've always expressed myself poorly when it matters most. I listened to your podcast today. Hearing you speak about how our treatment made you feel was like a physical blow. I recognized myself in your description, and I didn't like the man I saw. The letter continued detailing specific moments he regretted. Times he had dismissed my achievements or compared me unfavorably to Madison. He acknowledged patterns I had never expected him to recognize, let alone admit to. Our therapist suggested I write this letter as part of my own healing process, but I'm sending it to you because you deserve to know that I see my failures now. I understand if you cannot forgive me yet or perhaps ever. But I want you to know that I am proud of the woman you've become. Not despite our mistakes, but because you had the strength to overcome them. I read the letter 3 times, tears streaming down my face. It wasn't a magical fix for years of damage, but it was the first time my father had ever taken full responsibility for his actions, without qualification or excuse. The morning of the television appearance, I woke to a text from Madison: "We're all watching today. Good luck, we love you." The "we" gave me pause. Had my parents and sister gathered to watch the interview together, the thought was both comforting and unsettling. At the studio, I was whisked through hair and makeup, then guided to a plush sofa, where the host, Alicia Donahue, greeted me warmly. "Thank you for being here, Hazel," she said as the cameras prepared to roll. "Just be yourself. Your story is powerful enough without embellishment." When the red light on the camera illuminated, Alicia turned to face the audience. "Today we're talking about family dynamics and the long-lasting impact of parental expectations." My guest Hazel Montgomery recently wrote a powerful essay about overhearing her parents call her their greatest disappointment, and how that moment forced her to reevaluate her entire relationship with her family. She turned to me with a compassionate expression. "Hazel, thank you for sharing your story with us. Can you take us back to that moment when you heard those devastating words?" I took a deep breath and began speaking. As with the podcast, I found that sharing my experience became easier with each question. Alicia was a skilled interviewer, drawing out aspects of my story I hadn't fully examined before. "What surprised you most about the response to your essay?" she asked. "The universality of it," I replied honestly. "So many people have written to me saying they felt like I was telling their story." It made me realize that what I thought was a uniquely painful experience is actually something many people struggle with. This gap between who we are and who our parents wanted us to be. "And how has your relationship with your parents evolved since they discovered you heard their comments?" This was the question I had been dreading. I chose my words carefully. "It's a work in progress. They're taking steps to understand how their behavior affected me, and I'm learning to set boundaries while leaving room for potential healing." I don't think family relationships are ever simple, even in the best circumstances. What would you say to parents watching who might recognize themselves in your story? I hadn't expected this question, but found I had an answer ready. I'd say that children hear everything. Not just the words you say to their face, but the ones you say when you think they're not listening, and they internalize those messages in ways that can shape their entire lives. So be mindful of how you speak about your children even when they're not in the room. After the interview concluded, I checked my phone to find dozens of messages from friends and acquaintances who had watched the segment. But the one that caught my eye was from an unknown number. "Saw you on Morning Light. I've been where you are. Would you be interested in contributing to a book I'm editing about family estrangement and reconciliation?" Dr. Rebecca Chen. Family psychologist. I searched Dr. Chen online and discovered she was a respected authority on family dynamics, with several published books, and a practice specializing in parent-child relationship repair. This wasn't just another opportunity for exposure, it was a chance to contribute to a resource that might help others navigate situations like mine. I called Dr. Chen that afternoon and was immediately drawn to her straightforward approach. "Your story illustrates what I call the expectations gap," she explained. "When parents' image of their child conflicts with the child's authentic self, it creates a chasm that both parties feel but often can't articulate. Your ability to name this experience makes your perspective valuable." We arranged to meet for coffee the following week to discuss the book project further. When I arrived at the cafe, I was surprised to find not just Dr. Chen but 3 other contributors, all with their own stories of family fracture and attempts at healing. James had stopped speaking to his father after coming out as gay and enduring years of rejection before a tentative reconciliation. Sonia had cut ties with her mother, who refused to acknowledge her husband's emotional abuse. Miguel had been the black sheep in a family of high achievers much like me. As we shared our experiences, I felt a sense of belonging I had never experienced in my own family. These strangers understood aspects of my pain in ways my parents never could, not because they didn't love me, but because they hadn't lived through similar rejection. The book isn't just about estrangement, Dr. Chen explained as our conversation deepened. It's about redefining family relationships on more authentic terms. Sometimes that means reconciliation, sometimes it means maintained distance with clear boundaries, and sometimes it means creating chosen family when biological family fails us. As I left the cafe, I felt a clarity I hadn't expected. My story wasn't just my own anymore. It had become part of a larger narrative about family identity and the complicated path to self-acceptance. The pain that had once felt isolating now connected me to others in meaningful ways. That evening I received a text from Madison. "Mom and Dad want to know if you'd consider joining us for dinner next weekend. No pressure, just an invitation." I stared at the message, conflicted. Part of me wanted to maintain the distance that had been protecting me. Another part recognized that healing couldn't happen without risk. After long consideration, I replied, "I'll come. But I need you there too." "Always," Madison texted back. "We're in this together now." Her response brought unexpected tears to my eyes. Perhaps the silver lining to this painful journey was a new, more honest relationship with my sister, one built on mutual understanding rather than the artificial roles we'd been assigned. The week leading up to the family dinner was filled with anxious anticipation. I continued working on my memoir, finding that the prospect of seeing my parents again added new dimensions to my writing. The hurt was still there, but it was no longer the only emotion coloring my perspective. I also had my first official meeting with Dr. Chen about my contribution to her book. She wanted me to write about the moment of discovery, not just hearing my parents' words, but recognizing the patterns that had shaped our relationship for years. "Your story illuminates how families create narratives about each member," she said. "The golden child, the black sheep, the responsible one, the creative one. These labels seem harmless, but they can become prisons that prevent authentic growth and connection." Her insights helped me frame my upcoming dinner with my parents in a different light. They weren't just individuals who had hurt me. They were people trapped in their own narrative about what success and failure looked like, about what it meant to be a good parent or a worthy child. This understanding didn't excuse their behavior, but it helped me approach our meeting with more compassion than I had felt in months. Not just for them, but for all of us, caught in a family system that had limited everyone's ability to see each other clearly. The night of the family dinner arrived with a mix of dread and strange anticipation. I chose my outfit carefully, professional but comfortable, an armor of sorts, for what promised to be an emotionally challenging evening. I wore the silver pendant Leo had given me for courage, a small talisman against old insecurities. Madison had texted that she would meet me outside our parents' house, a gesture I appreciated more than she knew. When I arrived and saw her waiting on the porch, a wave of nostalgia hit me. Countless family dinners where we'd sat at the same table but experienced entirely different realities. "You came," she said, embracing me. "I wasn't sure you would." "Neither was I admitted. She squeezed my hand. "They're nervous too. Mom's cooked enough food for 20 people. That made me smile despite myself. Stress cooking was my mother's most reliable tell. The moment we stepped inside, the familiar sense of home enveloped me. My mother's signature pot roast, the subtle lavender of her favorite candles, the faint hint of my father's cologne. For a disorienting second, I was a child again before I understood the complexities of family love and its conditional nature. My parents stood awkwardly in the entryway, clearly unsure of the proper greeting. Did we hug as though nothing had happened, shake hands like formal acquaintances? In the end, my mother stepped forward with tears in her eyes and simply said, "Thank you for coming, Hazel." Dinner began with uncomfortable small talk. The weather, neighborhood developments, safe topics that skirted the elephant in the room. Madison valiantly attempted to maintain conversation, asking about my writing projects and sharing anecdotes from the hospital where she worked. Eventually, my father cleared his throat. "Hazel, we saw your interview on Morning Light. You spoke very eloquently." "Thank you," I replied, unsure where this was leading. "It was difficult to watch," he continued. "Not because of anything you said, but because hearing you describe our relationship from your perspective was illuminating and painful." My mother reached for his hand. "We've been doing a lot of reflection since we realized how our behavior affected you." I nodded, waiting. This was their moment to speak, not mine. "Our therapist suggested something," my father said. "She thought it might help if we each shared one memory that represents how we've experienced our relationship. Not to compare pain or place blame, but to understand each other better." It was such a therapist thing to suggest that I almost laughed, but the sincerity in my father's eyes stopped me. "Okay," I agreed. "Who wants to start?" "I will," my mother volunteered. She took a deep breath. "When you were 10, you wrote that short story for the school competition, the one about the girl who could talk to trees. You didn't win, but your teacher sent a note saying it was the most creative entry she'd received. I was so proud that I called everyone I knew to tell them about my brilliant daughter." I stared at her in surprise. "I never knew that." "That's the point," she said sadly. "I told everyone except you. I praised you to others but couldn't figure out how to tell you directly. I think I was afraid of showing favoritism between you and Madison, so I overcorrected and ended up not showing you the appreciation you deserved at all." Her admission left me momentarily speechless. I had no memory of her being proud of that story, only my father's comment that perhaps I should focus more on my math homework. Madison went next. "Mine is from high school when I was struggling with chemistry. Hazel stayed up all night helping me prepare for a test even though she had her own finals the next day. I got an A and she fell asleep during her English exam, her best subject. That was when I first realized that I might be getting advantages Hazel never received. Everyone praised me for the A, but no one seemed to notice Hazel's sacrifice. The memory was bittersweet. I had been happy to help Madison but devastated by the B that had broken my perfect English record. No one had connected the two events except, apparently, my sister." My father shifted uncomfortably in his chair. "My memory is more recent. It was when you moved to New York. I was terrified for you, the city, the uncertainty of a writing career, all of it. Instead of telling you I was scared, I became critical. I thought if I pointed out all the potential pitfalls, somehow you'd be better prepared. It was the wrong approach, but it came from love, not disappointment." His explanation didn't erase the hurt his criticism had caused, but it offered a new lens through which to view our interactions. His fear manifesting as judgment, my insecurity interpreting it as rejection. When it was my turn, I chose carefully. I remember my college graduation. Madison was sick with the flu and couldn't come. After the ceremony, all my friends were taking photos with their families, everyone celebrating together. You both seemed distracted checking your phones for updates on Madison, worried about her being home alone. I understood why you were concerned, but in that moment I felt like even on my biggest achievement day I was still the secondary consideration. My mother wiped away tears. "We had no idea you felt that way. We were trying to be present for both of you." "That's the problem," I said gently. "You thought you were balancing your attention, but from my perspective the scales were never equal." "What do we do now?" my father asked, his voice uncharacteristically vulnerable. "How do we move forward from here?" It was the question I'd been asking myself for months. "I don't think there's a quick fix," I answered honestly. "Trust takes time to rebuild. But I think this Talking openly, acknowledging the past without defensiveness, is a start. Madison reached for my hand under the table. I want us to be a real family, she said. Not the perfect image we've tried to project, but something authentic, even if it's messy. Me too, I admitted. But I need you all to understand something important. I'm not going to shrink myself anymore to fit into the role I've been assigned. My writing career is taking off in ways I never imagined, and I'm going to pursue it with everything I have. I need to know you support that, not just tolerate it. My parents exchanged glances before my father spoke. We want to support you, Hazel. We're trying to learn how. Then maybe that's enough for now, I said. Trying. As the evening continued, the conversation flowed more naturally. We didn't solve everything. Decades of family dynamics couldn't be untangled in one dinner, but we had broken through the surface tension that had kept us locked in familiar harmful patterns. Before I left, my mother handed me a small gift bag. This is for you, she said. Open it later. At home, I found a silver-framed photo I'd never seen before. Me, at about 7, reading intently on our old porch swing, completely absorbed in my book. On the back, my mother had written, Hazel lost in her stories. This is when I should have known you were meant to be a writer. I'm sorry it took me so long to see you clearly. Love, Mom. It wasn't forgiveness, not yet. But it was acknowledgement of who I had always been and who I was becoming. For now, that was enough to build upon. The next morning, I received an unexpected email. Dr. Chen's publisher had read an advance copy of my chapter for her book and wanted to meet with me about writing a standalone memoir. Your voice is compelling, the editor wrote. We believe there's an audience hungry for your perspective on family healing. As I stared at the email, my phone rang. It was the producer from Morning Light. Hazel, the response to your interview has been overwhelming, Eleanor said. We've received hundreds of messages from viewers who connected with your story. We'd like to bring you back for a follow-up segment, this time with Dr. Chen, to discuss your collaboration. Everything was happening so quickly. The memoir deal, the television appearances, the speaking opportunities that were beginning to fill my calendar. My inbox contained invitations to writing conferences and family therapy symposiums alike, my perspective suddenly valued in multiple spheres. I called Leo to share the news. I told you this would happen, he said, his voice warm with pride. You've taken the worst moment of your life and transformed it into something that helps others. That's real alchemy, Hazel. Later that day, I received a text from Madison. Mom and Dad can't stop talking about last night. Dad actually used the word proud when he told his friend about your TV appearance. Baby steps, right, I smiled at the message. Baby steps indeed. That evening, as I worked on my book proposal, I realized something profound had shifted. The story I was telling was no longer just about pain and disappointment. It had evolved into something more complex and ultimately more hopeful. How families wound each other in unique ways, and how those wounds can become openings for greater understanding if we're brave enough to explore them. The parents who had once called me their greatest disappointment were now part of my greatest success. Not because they had created it, but because the journey to overcome their perception had led me to my authentic voice. The irony wasn't lost on me. In the months that followed, our family continued the difficult work of rebuilding. There were setbacks and uncomfortable moments, old patterns that emerged in times of stress, but there was also new growth. My father asking thoughtful questions about my writing process. My mother sending articles about the publishing industry, both of them attending my first public reading with visible pride. Madison and I developed a relationship independent of our parents, discovering common ground we'd never explored, and acknowledging the different challenges we'd each faced in our assigned family roles. The golden child's burden of perfectionism had been as real in its way as my struggle for recognition. Dr. Chen's book was published to critical acclaim, with my chapter highlighted in several reviews as particularly moving. The following week, I signed my own book deal. Not just for a memoir, but for a 2-book contract that included a novel I'd been quietly working on for years. 1 year to the day after I'd overheard my parents' devastating words, I received a package in the mail. Inside was a first edition of my favorite childhood book, the one that had first inspired me to become a writer. The inscription read, "To our daughter Hazel, whose words have taught us more than ours ever taught her. With pride and love, Mom and Dad." I ran my fingers over their handwriting, feeling the complex emotions that family always evokes: the lingering hurt, the cautious hope, the enduring connection despite everything. They had been wrong about me, yes. But in their wrongness, they had inadvertently set me on the path to finding my true self. Sometimes the greatest gift we receive is not being seen clearly by others, but learning to see ourselves clearly despite them. That was the unexpected lesson of my journey. One I continued to share with readers who recognized their own stories in mine, creating a community of understanding among those who had felt unseen in their own families. The parents who forgot to hang up the phone that day couldn't have known they were setting in motion events that would transform not only my life, but many others. Their careless words, meant to remain private, had become the catalyst for a public conversation about family expectations and the courage to defy them. It wasn't the happy ending I might have imagined as a child. It was something more nuanced and ultimately more valuable, the beginning of a new story, one where all of us were finally reading from the same page. 6 months after my book was published, I stood at a podium in a crowded bookstore, looking out at faces both familiar and new. My parents and Madison sat in the front row, a united family presence I once would have thought impossible. Leo stood in the back, giving me a thumbs up as I prepared to read. "Thank you all for coming tonight," I began. When I started writing this book, it was a way to process pain. I never imagined it would become a bridge, not just between me and my family, but between so many readers and their own complex family relationships. As I read selected passages, I watched my parents' reactions. There was no defensiveness now, no denial of my experience. Instead, there was something I had always craved: recognition. They saw me finally, not as the daughter they had wanted me to be, but as the woman I had become. After the reading, during the Q&A session, a young woman raised her hand. "Did writing this book heal your relationship with your parents?" she asked. I considered the question carefully. Healing suggests a return to some previous whole state, but I don't think that's what happened with us. Instead, we've created something entirely new. A relationship based on who we actually are, not who we thought we should be. That's not healing so much as transformation. Later, at the small reception, my father approached me with uncharacteristic hesitation. "I have something to tell you," he said, leading me to a quiet corner. "Something I should have shared long ago." My stomach tightened with apprehension. "When I was your age," he continued, "I wanted to be a writer too. My father, your grandfather, told me it was a waste of time, that I needed a real career. So I became an accountant instead." I stared at him in shock. In all our years together, he had never mentioned this dream. "When you chose writing," he said, "it brought up all my old regrets, my own abandoned ambitions. I think part of me resented that you had the courage I lacked. It was easier to discourage you than to face my own disappointment with myself." His confession stunned me. All those years of feeling judged and behind it had been something I never suspected. Not dismissal of my dreams, but envy of my courage to pursue them. "Why are you telling me this now?" I asked. He smiled sadly. "Because your book taught me that secrets between parents and children only create distance. And because I'm proud of you. Not despite the path you've chosen, but because of it. You did what I couldn't, and there's a kind of redemption in that for me." In that moment, something shifted between us, a final piece of understanding falling into place. My father's criticism had never been about me at all. It had been about his own unresolved relationship with creativity, with risk, with the road not taken. The revelation didn't erase the years of hurt, but it contextualized them in a way that allowed for deeper compassion. We were all, I realized, acting from our own unhealed places, our own insecurities and regrets. The miracle wasn't that we had hurt each other, that was almost inevitable, but that we had found our way back to each other with greater awareness. As the evening ended and I prepared to leave, Madison hugged me tightly. "You've changed us all," she whispered. "For the better." Looking around at my family, imperfect, struggling but present, I felt a sense of completion I had never expected to find. The parents who had once forgotten to hang up the phone had given me an unintended gift, the catalyst for claiming my own voice, not just on the page, but in life. My journey from overhearing those devastating words to standing confidently in my truth had been painful but necessary. Some flowers only bloom after fire has cleared the ground. Some truths only emerge after illusions have been burned away. And sometimes the most profound form of family love isn't unconditional acceptance, but the willingness to see each other clearly, flaws, wounds, strengths and all, and choose connection anyway. As we gathered for a final photo, author and family united in a new understanding, I thought about all the readers who had written to tell me how my story had helped them navigate their own family complexities. The private pain that had once isolated me had become a source of connection I never could have anticipated. That perhaps was the most surprising lesson of all. Our deepest wounds, when shared with courage and compassion, can become our greatest gifts to others. The words that were never meant for my ears had ultimately reached thousands of hearts, creating ripples of healing far beyond my own family circle. Some would call it karma, that my parents' thoughtless words had led to my greatest success. Some would call it justice, that the daughter they had underestimated had finally been seen and valued. But I preferred to call it transformation. The miraculous human capacity to take what hurts us and reshape it into something that heals. Thank you so much for staying with me through this entire journey of family betrayal and ultimate reconciliation. I hope my story has resonated with some of you who might have experienced similar dynamics in your own families. Have you ever had a moment where painful truth ultimately led to healing? I'd love to hear your experiences in the comments below. If this story touched you, please hit that like button and subscribe to hear more authentic family stories. Don't forget to share with someone who might need to hear that family disappointment doesn't have to be the end of the story. Sometimes it's just the beginning of a more authentic connection. Until next time, remember that sometimes the most profound healing comes from the deepest wounds. Thank you for being part of my journey.